All right, hello and welcome to Real Talk Office Hours Hunting for Silver Linings with Monday, June 29, 2020. It's hosted today by Corey Hart, myself, George Katsanos, and we have Georgi from Plovdiv, Bulgaria joining us, Startup Grind chapter director over there near the Black Sea. Now, and brought to you generally by Startup Grind, the world's largest startup community. We have 600 plus chapters in over 125 countries. Startup Grind, we operate with a mission to educate, inspire, and connect, and we are driven by three values. Those are make friends, not contacts, help others before you help yourself, and give before you take. Now, the pandemic has been and will continue to be the great global leveler. As entrepreneurs, we do our very best for our businesses, teams, and families, and we should be informed, rational, analytical, and rigorous in our thinking. We should also learn to control our biases as they emerge in various circumstances. Now, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as we track the intersection of biases, facts, and action through our review of global financial markets, alongside check-ins and real talk with Startup Grind chapter directors, entrepreneurs, and ecosystem stakeholders from around the world. Now, no one has a crystal ball, but if we keep our eyes and ears open and pay attention, we may be able to see around the bend, and with some luck, spot the silver linings that are around every cloud. Now, if you missed the live events, you can view the recordings at startupgrind.com/grand-rapids, where you can also download the reading notes from every single show. Now, before I introduce George for the global market update, a little bit of housekeeping. Comments made and views expressed by all participants in this podcast are not intended to invite or incite individuals, entrepreneurs, or investors to buy or sell financial assets, real assets, commodities, futures, and or options. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and to inform, not to trade or to invest. If you feel compelled to trade and or invest, please call your broker. Remember, however, risk is everywhere, even when you think that you're not taking a risk. Now, with that, it's my pleasure to introduce George Katsanos to get us started with the catch-up of what the global markets are thinking. And George, I think I got you set up to share your screen.
Thank you, Corey. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I would like to welcome you to our Monday morning, June 29th, Real Talk show. As Corey said, if you feel impelled to trade, please call either your broker or your priest. This is not a market for the faint-hearted. It is dangerous, it is volatile, it is unpredictable, and more than anything else, it is becoming more and more opaque. As we noted this morning, a couple of important things to watch. Last Thursday evening, the Federal Reserve put fresh limits on the US banking industry. The annual stress test found that several institutions could get close to minimum capital levels in scenarios tied to the coronavirus pandemic. As a result, the Federal Reserve asked the banks to suspend share buybacks for the first quarter and limit dividend payments at the current level. While all large banks remain strongly capitalized, for the first time in 10 years since the 2008 crisis, the Federal Reserve is requiring banks to resubmit updated capital plans later this year. This is a big event. Probably, hopefully, we'll hear more about it tomorrow when Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve Board, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin testify before Congress. They are likely to focus on the economy and monetary policy. But remember, please, that as the politicians are mentioning, another stimulus package is expected very soon. We don't know what it will look like, but there is certainly an effort, both real and due to political considerations, to help the economy rebalance or at least face the headwinds of this stop-go scenario that we are witnessing as we speak. Now let's go back to our screens, the markets. If you remember, we always talk about, we always talk about the financial markets, but we do not focus on equities only. We believe that as entrepreneurs and investors, we should be looking for signals across all asset classes, whether we're talking about real estate, whether we're talking about currencies, bonds, commodities, or equities. Let's start with the currencies, as we always do, because whatever effects we may have in perceptions, in liquidity, in volatility and risk, first and foremost appear in the currency markets. The dollar is trading within the range that we have noted over the last several weeks, between 111 and 114, broadly defined. From a low of 112.20 on Friday, we're now trading at 112.55. That means that we may have a slight risk on day. In other words, it is highly likely that investors will start returning back to equities after last week's sell-off. The yen is getting a bit weaker at 107.74, having hit a high of 106 and change last week. Sterling is again slightly weaker at 123 from a high of 125, 126 last week and the week before. Across the board, we're seeing that on the currency front, the dollar is slightly weaker than last Friday. When we look at our bond markets, and remember the bond markets are the markets that are important for conservative investors. When investors are looking for a safe haven, they go into fixed income instruments. Japan's anchoring policy has not changed. Look at the 10-year curve, the 10-year yield, 0.0%. It has not changed from the first day of our show, and it is unlikely to change. The reason is because the Bank of Japan wants to make it relatively inexpensive for the authorities to borrow in order to support the economy. And as we mentioned before, Australia announced a similar policy last month. We expect that informally, the Federal Reserve is likely to pursue a similar policy. So across the board in Asia, not a significant change in the bond market yields. In Europe, if anything, we see that the high yielders, Italy and Greece, remain well bid under 130, whereas Switzerland and Germany, the most conservative, the most successful economies in Europe, remain at the 0.5% negative yield. In the US, the 10-year is trading in 0.64, slightly closer to 0.6. Canada is at 0.5 and Mexico under 6%. Net, the fixed income market tells us that investors remain cautious, very cautious. Let's go back to commodities. Very briefly, West Texas Intermediate at 38.71, under $40. Brent just over $41. Not much change here, and the reason is that the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Russia seems to be holding up for the time being. We expect that the energies will remain range-bound until this huge excess capacity that is sitting in tankers around the world is diminished or reduced. In order for this to happen, we need a strong global demand. This is unlikely to happen very soon. But having said that, the production and output cutbacks are essentially helping rebalance the equation, supply and demand, a little bit in the oil sector. Natural gas, it jumped to 1.7. We're in the middle of the summer season here in North America, so natural gas is going to become more expensive as more and more demand for cool air conditioning increases. On the precious metal side, gold, 1780. Again, two major fears: one, debasement of the global currencies, the major currencies, and two, considerations about a safe haven. We have not seen any major change on the gold front, but we do see that copper is very strong. Copper is trading close to 270. It's about 0.5% up today. The copper strength mirrors the slow recovery in manufacturing in Southeast Asia primarily. On the agricultural front, we saw last week that China bought some beans. Let's see what happens this week. On Tuesday, we will have the WASDE report. It will be interesting because we do have a large crop. This crop is, again, the result of good weather, good harvesting conditions so far in the northern plains here in the US. And for that reason alone, we need demand. So despite the trade war, or at least the talk, of the trade war. The Chinese are slowly coming back, and that's why we see that wheat is up $8 and corn 5.25. This is a big move. Finally, stocks. Well, the stock market is essentially trading on water. The Nikkei is down 2.3%. Hang Seng was down 1%. Australia was up 1.5%. This mirrored the slowdown that we saw on Friday here in the US. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how we close today, whether the expectations of stimulus is going to be reflected on a firm equity market. Europe, on the other hand, has been trading slightly positive. The FTSE is up almost half a point, 0.5%. The DAX about 0.4. The CAC 40, the French index, is about 0.1% today, and Spain is 0.8%. It is relatively good news that the shoe has not fallen off yet in Europe, that the ECB is providing liquidity and buying everything they can buy. Here in the US, the Dow is up 1%, the S&P almost flat, NASDAQ slightly negative, nothing big, nothing major to report at home. It is important to see how we close today. In closing this review, I would like to caution you that on Thursday we have half a trading day. The markets are closed on Friday, and hold on to your lederhosen. It is going to remain bumpy. Back to you, Corey.
Thank you, George, for that. Really appreciate the coverage and insight. Interesting. We're running into this moment right now where there's a lot of apprehension on the consumer side, and as we've mentioned many times to our entrepreneurs that listen to us and participate, really important to know who your customers are and if you're still relevant. And more and more firms need to be looking at that more than just once. We just doing that a few months ago isn't enough. A lot of companies are still trying to find their way in that narrative.
To your point, Corey, what was interesting last week was Nike. They reported slower sales because of the closure of the shops. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, they had a 30% increase on online sales. So it is interesting to see how, on the one hand, the bricks and mortars is being replaced, but at the same time, the overall demand, the overall consumer profile is becoming more cautious. A point to remember is that we have seen a 26% increase in the money supply here in the US within 3 months. Mm-hmm. This has never happened before. This is the largest increase, even on an annualized basis. So despite the money in the economy, investors are saving. Right. We'll see how it all develops.
Yes, and that's a global effect. We're seeing savings rates rise, real incomes rise. Poverty is being wiped away in some ways, in some regards, in some locations, just because of the stimulus, which is keeping us all on our toes. So, I'd like to get into the portion where we talk about when we get to our global tour of different ecosystems, and we are really have a great pleasure to have Georgi here from Bulgaria. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate the generosity of your time.
Thanks for the invitation, Corey and George. It's fantastic to take part in the startup grind of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, there we go.
So yeah, that's fantastic. Hopefully we can kind of establish some relationships between our regions and at least learn a bit more about each other, which will be greatly beneficial, I believe.
Yep, and that's you hit it on the head there. We do this because the globalization of ideas and the globalization of capital and sharing is increasing, while we might see like the hard goods and the supply chains actually shrinking. So opportunities are abound, and we're out hunting for them. Not just for ourselves, but for those communities and ecosystems with which we are communicating. So one thing that we found pretty important, maybe we should have done it a little bit sooner, but if you could start with maybe a little bit of like a general background of, we're going to start with you, and then we'll get into like your region. So you personally, you are a perfect candidate, even though you're fairly new to Startup Grind. I am too. I'm also 9 months old. But your personal background in tech and innovation is pretty impressive. Can you speak about your personal background, how you found Startup Grind? Yeah, start with that.
Sure. Thanks, Corey. I don't know how impressive it is, but let's say we all tried. I started, in fact, in finance something like 17 years ago. I relocated to the United Kingdom, London. I went there to study, and I started my career there in finance. Then I moved to different industries. Then I liked strategy quite a lot. So I worked with strategy consulting companies. Then I moved into insurance sector, where again was kind of a mixture between strategy and finance. And finally, I worked for a consulting company as well. And throughout the last 5 years I was in London, I was starting to get very impressed by the tech scene there and all the startups coming and kind of solving problems. A lot of investments obviously going on. London is nearly on top of the most looked destination for startups, probably second or the third most important one globally. So kind of my appetite increased quite a lot about it, and I had a chance to work for one of the biggest startups, insurtech startups in the UK, called Guardian 1821, which pretty much revolutionized life insurance over there in the UK. And I really got to the idea, is like, why shouldn't start something kind of with a partner or on my own or anything? So 2 years ago, what I did, I started a small software development startup outside. It's not quite solving a big problem or anything. It's just much more focused on working with startups and scale-ups and helping them with the technology delivery from conception all the way to development. And I started looking into Bulgaria, where I'm originally. And some time ago, I didn't really believe that I'll come back, because, as I say, London is the big smoke, a lot going on there, and I want to see the world. However, 1 year ago, I relocated to Bulgaria, to Plovdiv, where I'm from, which is the second city. And I start to look around what I can do. Obviously, I have this software agency running, so that's all fine. But I see an ecosystem here, which is quite new, quite underdeveloped as well, but with a great potential, because what Bulgaria has is quite a lot of technology talent. And at the moment, it's one of the top outsourcing and nearshoring destination within Europe. But I thought that these people, they got the skills and stuff like this. Maybe they need a bit of motivation, a bit of inspiration, and most about it, role models, which can be like a North Stars for them and start developing their own companies. So I started looking for an organization or network which can help me help the local ecosystem. And that's how I found Startup Grind, in fact, nearly a year ago. And I really like the concept. I like the organization. I went through the course, graduated from it, and that's how I started the local chapter here in Plovdiv. And it's been an interesting journey. What's really important about the Startup Grind, and I'm sure that Corey can testify to that, is this global interconnectedness, because this is 600 chapter directors, nearly is the same number of co-directors as well. A lot of events going on and a lot of cross-border linkages are created and relationships formed through Startup Grind, which is the most important for me as well. And going forward, I'm hoping to be able to hook up the local tech ecosystem with kind of different places like the Great Lakes and other more regionally as well, here around the Black Sea coast and Southeastern Europe as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, my background, I'm quite impressed with technology, with innovation, because I've worked in strategy, and I see it almost overnight, but it wasn't overnight, maybe within the course of a couple of years, how all strategy from a physical, typical Michael Porter 5 horses strategy moved into a digital one. And everyone kind of transformed. We don't need an open office in Malaysia or in Australia if we can serve the clients virtually from our office in our home country. So this made me think the whole technological advancement and opportunity in a much more kind of a simple way in the same, but at the same time profound way as well. And I see the technology will change everything. And I say, okay, let's jump into it and help companies to digitize, help consumers get better choice and better service digitally, and just move much forward on a technology side. And a lot of the great problems that humanity faces and we face in our regions and our businesses can be solved by technology. And that's another thing which really impressed me very much. And I really want to help as much companies as possible, as many people as possible as well, to solve problems, because that's what we technologists do, solve problems. And that's innovation. Innovation is a big word. Solving problem is the real world for me. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
That's really great. Thank you so much. And I know that we at Startup Grinder, of course, honored and so grateful to have you on the team. I'm really excited that you mentioned the quality talent that is in the region. In many of the startups that I have done product development with, I've really focused on, I've used Bulgarian and Ukrainian like talent, and it's
Great.
just like really, really great, honest and quick work being done by a lot of the people who are, outsourcing. And in the pandemic, what we found is that, maybe 60% of like jobs and roles can be done, remotely pretty much. And then if we do expand a global as far as our customer base that offers the upcoming or smaller middle-sized regions like my own and your own, and like we have opportunities to work with global, like the former what we would think about as the centers of innovation, like you said, London, like the Bay Area. So we're on the same playing field, if you could maybe speak about the region there in Bulgaria, is like maybe the sectors, the largest sectors in your ecosystem that are served by tech and startups.
Sure. Thanks, Corey. And it's great that you can testify to Bulgarian talent as well, because that's it's always nice to hear. We all humans ultimately. The tech ecosystem in Bulgaria is relatively new and young. I think it's been developing really significantly in the last 10-15 years, but we have to really give a little bit of a background, because back in the communist days, and we're talking about 40-50 years ago, Bulgaria was designated to become one of the important centers of early software development as well. So there was a lot of focus on STEM education, so physics, mathematics, chemistry as well, hard sciences, which develop a quite a significant pool of people specializes in this field, and specifically mathematicians, and they started kind of venturing into software development. There is a lot of technologies which has been kind of used one or the other, or kind of taken from the Western countries and developed into different ones as well, and build on. So one of the core advantages of the country is this background. So there's no background which is kind of 10-15 years ago. It goes many more years from an educational point of view as well. And what happened is in the early 2000s, a lot of companies around the world, they're looking for nearshoring destination, because obviously we know all the offshoring kings like India specifically, and later on Philippines, Vietnam, and all these East Asian countries. But they saw a big time difference, first of all. Second, a different in languages, because that's another thing Bulgarians excel in is foreign languages. And one of the biggest demands has been from German-speaking countries for German speakers. And it's not easy, as you say, for a nation to speak German. Probably English is much more okay because of the imperial past of UK and the kind of access the people have to English culture and language. But let's say German or Spanish or the Scandinavian languages even, other countries suffer about it. And Bulgaria has quite a lot of language education as well, traditions, and this was a big pull, together with the technological skills and language skills, and a lot of companies starting to nearshore, European companies mostly, no Americans, starting to nearshore in Bulgaria. And it's just 1 to 2 hours time difference as well, which is much better than 5, 6, or 7. So that's how everything started in early 2000s. And then we had our biggest kind of exit, which is a company called Telerik and doing enterprise software. And that was in 2014, in fact, and they got bought by Progress for about $250 million. And I think this really spiked the local ecosystem to say there are people who can make it big. And 250 million might not be big for the Grand Lakes or the States, but it's quite significant for Bulgaria, let's say. And that's how everything started. And then venture funds started to appear as well. And I have to be honest, the beginning of it has been very heavily funded and facilitated by European Union funds for innovation and development as well, rather than private money. Now, I would say 7-8 years later, it's starting to become a bit more playing field and more private money are going into it, but still the majority, maybe about 60 to 70%, is still funds and grants for European Union, which even not the best, they served a good role, and they created capital specifically for early stage companies, because when we look in the Bulgarian ecosystem, it's much more about concept stage, early stage, everything pre-seed, angel investing, venture capital, early stage of investments. We don't have much series A, B, C, and so on and so forth. Obviously, we need much more developed ecosystem for that.
Georgi,
you asked me
Georgi, question very quickly. What are the conditions of European community funds being invested in startups?
To be honest, George, they're quite favorable, because the vast majority of these funds are grants. Let's say European Commission has safeguarded 100 million euros for Bulgaria to invest within technology startups. And let's say the conditions is
every year or over a 5-year period?
It depends. No, it's over a 5-year period, but we have more money coming in. And the conditions, let's say, are to invest in early stage startups, 200 startups, let's say, for 5 years, pretty much in any sector, no sector specific as well. And the private funds matching varies between maximum 30%, but sometimes it can be as low as 5% as well. So the conditions very favorable as well. So obviously this minimizes the risk quite a lot for investment, but at the same time create different issues as well, because the selection of startups is not as rigorous as it could eventually be. The due diligence and later on kind of involvement probably is not as best as in private money. So it creates issues occasionally as well. But again, it's like we cannot and should not be too picky. For me, the most important is that the capital coming into the sector. And you asked me about the sectors, Corey. It's a very diverse, there is no really a big specialization in Bulgaria. If anything, it lately becomes a center for fintech. So financial innovation and financial technology, there's some interesting payment solutions, and working with other payment providers, as well as some qual of the whole optimization of the loan origination process, let's say, which is very important for the banks as well. There's some kind of a insurtech platforms are being developed, which pretty much automate the whole workflow of insurance from initiation all the way to servicing. So if there is a focus, it's a fintech, but at the same time, the population is quite entrepreneurial historically. So people have ideas within the educational space, people have ideas within the healthcare, people have ideas and concepts within the computer science. Blockchain is being, yes, another specialization I need to mention is blockchain. And it's not the crypto stuff. We have quite a lot of the crypto miners, but it's not the focus anymore. But there's a very interesting solutions developing on blockchain as well within the country, and it's becoming one of, I'll definitely say, one of the European centers of blockchain specifically, and blockchain across different sectors, not just kind of a fintech or kind of a health tech, edutech. So, and it's interesting twist, in fact, I would say, starting in crypto and quite a lot of kind of a speculation, and then suddenly moving into blockchain in different uses and variations. So I would point fintech as the strongest sector, but again, it's open, and all this comes in because of this technology background, Corey, and these companies which nearshore, and they move into a different level. So we have the biggest VMware, let's say, development center outside the US in Sofia, in Bulgaria, for example. And we have more, let's say, Financial Times is developing the core platform here. Ocado, a big retail company of UK, is developing their core platform, which is logistics and automating, roboting here in Bulgaria as well. So a lot of companies starting to move into R&D here rather than only nearshoring. And this starting to develop even more skills and specializations. And what happened, people start working, and once they get senior after 5, 7, 8 years, they got some money behind it, and they start venturing out and creating their own small startups or partnerships. Some of them are looking for financing, some of them are not. But this is a diverse variety, because the jobs they hold before is not in one sector. So Bulgaria is not really sector specific, which is a curse and a blessing, I would say, because we need specialization to delve into it really and get even more focused. But at the same time, it makes us very, very flexible and very fluid to create ideas and cater for different needs as well. And that sector or any sector. I work in software development myself, and I work with different teams. And I can tell you that probably 9 out of 10 requests we can satisfy, irrespective of technology, irrespective of industry vertical as well. And people are quite impressed by it as well. It just, the people are versatile.
Yeah, you mentioned quite a few things that I want to maybe ask a couple questions about.
Please.
The first thing that when you and George were talking about the funds that are coming from the public sources, how are those being managed? Are those managed publicly? Is that why the due diligence isn't quite what it should be? Or is it a partnership with, say, accelerators and incubators? Is that how people access those funds? How do entrepreneurs get their hands on that cash?
Usually, Corey, they're all managed. They're managed, they're privately managed, because once these funds come into the country, there is kind of a competition made, and other kind of a previous funds. So individuals apply for it, and some of them get selected, and they kind of get certain funds to manage under the overview of a country regulator, a relatively light touch, I would say, and a quite light overview from European Commission as well.
Georgi,
so that's
just one question. Are the banks involved in this process? In other words, the intermediary between the European Union and the beneficiary is what? A ministry? Is it the local office of the EU? Who is the intermediate?
They're not the banks, George. Is the local office of the EU. There we have a ministry, an agency as well, and occasionally they're kind of a direct European Commission agencies based in Brussels as well. So, but it's administered with the help, facilitated through the government, not the banks. Banks have nothing to do without it. I think, and this is European Union prerequisite as well, because they don't really want to make, they see it as a private-public partnership in a way, but they see it because, as I said, mostly of those money are grants. They don't want to make it too commercial, and definitely not involve banks about it, because obviously banks will start charging interest and it become different situation.
Could be a conflict of interest, right? In the banks, there could be a conflict of interest. But what is fascinating from what you've described is that you do have success stories, and I mean, it's not only the idea of Telerik, but the ecosystem, the fact that the ecosystem is developing so rapidly, for all the reasons that you mentioned, is quite eye-opening, and suggests that these funds are not necessarily quote-unquote wasted. There is an outcome, and the outcome is feeding through to the next generation. You have a natural evolution.
Yes, you're very right, George. And I'm by default, I'm skeptical, because I'm quite kind of a free marketer and libertarian. So I'm quite skeptical towards the public funds often as well, but not because I always saw them as mismanaged rather than not for good use or good intention. So I think that's important to make a distinction. But I think what the country needed and got through that is examples, and the people saw role models. The people saw some exits, even small. They saw the ecosystem started to build, so it became in a way fashionable to work in a startup or to start creating something. And because Bulgaria is a relatively low cost of living as well still, it's not so difficult, and specifically younger people, when they still live with their parents or kind of the family is very strong here in a kind of a supporting role as well. So a lot of people are supported by family. So the risk levels are nowhere near, let's say, the US or even the UK as well. So all these factors together with become the leading factors for developing the ecosystem. There is another thing, because the sector which booms in Bulgaria is the technology sector, because all these foreign companies, they pay quite high salaries. They pay nearly kind of a salaries which are at a global level. And the young generation see that, and by default, they start gravitate towards the highest jobs, which happen to be software development and software engineering. So this perpetuates the wheel once again and more. So everything goes within that direction, really.
Your description, sorry, Corey, one point. What you described is so similar to what we've seen in the Silicon Valley. Back in the 50s, the idea of government pouring the first capital, Fairchild Communications being born, and from Fairchild spawning off all kinds of innovative solutions and so on. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. Great success.
Yeah, and I think and that's what Startup Grind does so well, is about telling those stories and also being that connective tissue so that we can showcase that, yeah, it can be done, and this is a place to do it. And on that point, you mentioned a little bit about the geography, right? And then also cost of living. Is there an effort by the government to import talent and entrepreneurs to start companies in Bulgaria? We're finding in a lot of the emerging ecosystems that there, like especially in Santiago, there's programs where you can come in, get a visa within 14 days, get funded, and rock and roll on an accelerator in no time at all. Is there anything like that happening in your region?
So it's in a way mixed bag. To be honest, Corey, regarding the talent, Bulgaria, which is good in Southeastern Europe, is becoming like the center of technology development, and we have some competitors in the eyes of Serbia and Romania, but no as developers in Bulgaria. I think Bulgarian kind of started acting earlier, so it's becoming naturally a center for people within our peninsula and kind of a neighborhood country to come to our and start developing the startups, because it's like some of them are no member of European Union, so all these kind of grants can go to them, let's say people in ex-Yugoslavia specifically, and some parts of ex-Soviet Union, which is beneficial. And we start having people coming to develop the startups ideas here. They're not that many, I have to say, and legally is interesting to say the least, but startup visa is being fought and under the worked. So hopefully within the next year or so we can do something like this. And the reason it's not that the population has anything against immigrants, specifically immigrants who kind of come to start something and stuff, but Bulgaria needs to follow European Union immigration norms and rules, and they're difficult for third countries. Even for Americans and Canadians, they're difficult because the third countries in European Union wants to stimulate internal migration rather than external as well, and that's why it's difficult. More and more people want to open the borders for kind of talents, specifically from Vietnam. But this is going difficult. This is going difficult, and the government is trying to focus much more about educating more and more young people to go into to get them into technology, and to focus on a local one rather than kind of import foreign one. So it's an open question. There's some strides in it, but they're not big. But at the same time, the country becomes good focus for the local neighborhood country to come and develop something. And you asked me about the party scene, and I have to admit, it's a bit like Santiago, as you mentioned, because you have a lot of young people, a lot of accelerators as well here in the capital, Sofia specifically, a lot of parties, and there's a lot, as I said, it becomes a little bit of a lifestyle option, which I really don't like. I'm old enough and I believe in grinding. That's why I like startup grind as well. I don't like easy money, quick wins, and anything like this. Tricks, I'm not like this. Never worked in my life, so I never advise anybody to do anything like this. But new generation who hasn't experienced kind of what I've experienced or we've experienced, it's difficult. So it's a mixed bag. There is a lifestyle around it. There is a lot of partying, which sometimes can obscure the whole idea of startup and stuff. And it's visible occasionally when you see some very luxurious and plush co-working spaces which have been open, some salaries of people getting to get paid from investors' money as well, rather than kind of get the skin in the game. You can see that as well. So, but again, it's like, I don't know, it's like any ecosystem, it develops in different ways. But I don't think so will be very it's not going to be cloudy, because now what the crisis is showing, and everyone wants an exit, everyone wants to develop a good product and stuff, and this doesn't go well with partying or something like this. So in a way, I think within the next few years, the ecosystem will kind of crystallize a bit further, and people will really focus, because they see the potential, they see a really good money they can make out of it, and great products they can create as well. So you can party once kind of you created something or something, or you can party until you're younger, and once you become 30 or 30 something and you get a bit more experience and industry knowledge, then you start focusing on developing something of your own.
That's a really great perspective, especially with the regional circumstances, and being a fairly young ecosystem with cash just like pouring in. We're also interested quickly hearing a little bit about where does the talent come from? Is there a pretty robust university system, and is there a focus on, like, say, tech transfer or innovation within that system?
Great question. Thanks for asking, Corey. The talent comes mostly from, I would say, 5 to 6 universities. Traditionally, we have a strong technical universities. In Bulgaria, the university system is like this. We have humanitarian universities, and we have technical universities and other specialized ones, but let's not go there. And technicals, they used to kind of teach engineers only, but no software engineers, quite a lot of hardware engineers, kind of electro engineers, mechanical, and all this sort of as well. And by default, these are the most prepared specialists, because there's a lot of mathematics and physics involved, and it's difficult to graduate for them. So that is the backbone. That's what created the backbone of the talent. And lately, last 5-6 years, we have the humanitarian universities developing these specialties as well, software engineering and development, QA, and kind of DevOps as well, but to a lesser extent, the technical universities. But what's interesting, we have kind of two big private academies. One of it is Telerik Academy, because the founders of Telerik, once they sold it, some of them, they decided, 3 of them, and one really took this, that he wants to give something back to the community, and he created quite significant private academy called Telerik Academy. And we have another one which is called SoftUni from Software University. And they educate quite a lot of people, because the courses are very hands-on, very practical. They're not academic at all, and they're much shorter as well. So within a year or 2 years max, with hands-on experience, and they do placements and give people internships occasionally. People can find jobs, junior level jobs. So the big influx towards those two, and they're not expensive as well. By default, education here, higher education, is nowhere near the US levels or anything like. So it's still quite affordable, even the private one. So the people start flocking into these two private academies as well. Some of them hoping that they can capitalize on connections of founders, or meet similar-minded people, which is happening as well. So it's these two streams of talent which is coming to the market. And again, when a big Western company comes in to nearshore or R&D, they're looking for talent. So sometimes the entry barriers are quite low as well, because they want sometimes for juniors raw talent with maybe a year a formal education in computer science, or few courses developed, and really intention to develop and go. So a lot of these entry-level positions over the years, if you multiply this by 10 years, they created quite a lot of funnel for talent as well, specifically on the job, getting some skills. and developing in that way. The government hasn't been very active within area. It's tried to stimulate it a little bit, kind of give more money to these special programs and universities, but nothing major. It wasn't driven by government at all. It was driven by private academies and universities themselves orientating kind of more of their resource towards what's on demand. And this is on demand because kind of the salary levels, even the starting salary levels, are relatively high. And the young folk, they just gravitate towards it. Even sometimes they finish a very different secondary school, let's say humanitarian, or sometimes even different. They go into software engineering like this because they heard that the big money being paid out. No, not all of them, of course, got kind of the jobs or get better in it, but sufficient numbers get somewhere, and which kind of feeds the funnel.
That's really great. And sometimes what we're finding is it's sometimes just really best for the government just to get out of the way, right? Especially when you have the private folks coming down, building those academies, making it okay that, you know, on the CV that it's like, yeah, you graduated from this academy. That's all we need. You know, the talent speaks for itself. That's really great. We're just a couple more questions for you, and then we can let you have the rest of your day back. But when we look at the next normal for your region, you know, through the lens of the pandemic, and then also at the same time, the conversation globally, especially with Startup Grind being a global organization, if you could answer that next normal question with maybe the backdrop of the issue of equity, and that is equity as far as economics, whether it's racial, gender, because it varies from region to region, and that's certainly part of this conversation as regions emerge on the other side of the pandemic, right?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Another great question, Corey. We're all kind of looking for the new normal. We're trying to find some silver linings as well, kind of creating some silver linings or imagining others. I think what the new normal will bring to the country is prosperity, because one big barrier has been dismantled, as George said, and this is the barrier of remote working, of remote connectedness, and all this kind of a virtual. I think now the silver lining of the whole pandemic is based on two pillars. First, because we can connect, we can prove that we can work virtually, remotely. And I'm here based in my terrace, as you can see behind me, and I'm talking to the people in the Great Lakes, which is what, I don't know, 10,000 miles away from me, and that's no issue whatsoever. And that's no problem to do business as well. So this interconnectedness is great for the country because demolishes barriers that companies want their partners to be next to them. Yeah, personal contact is always personal contacts, but in times of pandemics, ultimately we all focus to do business. And if business can be done only virtually, and maybe for the future, this will be a very kind of a significant viability to say, we can do it virtually. So in a country like Bulgaria, which is relatively small, not very well known, in a far corner of Europe, can only benefit of it as well because of the talent. And another big vertical, which is really developing under the new normal, and even locally, we can see the trend towards digital transformation. So a lot of kind of a static industry sectors, even manufacturing, even financial services, and kind of even the administration, the local administration is starting to look for different ways to serve the clients, being citizens, being kind of a bank customers, or even the GPs and the healthcare system to serve its patients, much more digitally orientated. So this will create enormous demand for digital everything, I call it, not just digital talent, digital solutions, digital problem solving, digital infrastructure, digital products, digital service, everything, so which is absolutely great as well. And I do hope that we can capitalize on these trends as well. And this was surprising for me to see that even on a local basis, and we're not advanced digitally as kind of our industries are fairly old school, the administration is fairly old school, bank system is fairly old school, paper-based, but even they start looking very seriously and starting to invest within digitization. So if this is happening in this speed in this sector, so it makes me a lot of hope what's going on kind of outside. And I work with a lot of specifically European countries and companies, and yeah, the push for the digitization is great. So I think within all those two main pillars, we can really capitalize on and help the tech sector and ecosystem really increase its value and its importance going forward and forward and forward.
Is the telecom infrastructure really robust throughout the entire country?
Very good question. I have to say we have one of the best internet connections in the world, one of the fastest as well. So we're probably number 5 or number 6. Definitely better than the US, definitely better than the UK, and most countries within European Union as well. Because here we leapfrogged to optic, cyber optic infrastructure. We didn't have ADSL or anything like this, so everything kind of is cable, and it's quite fast cable. So, and it's a big advantage.
And we like to ask the directors within your community, because as the chapter directors, we operate kind of like the mayors of our ecosystem. In the last few months, maybe more recently, what are some of the more recent questions that you're getting from those in your ecosystem, founders or whatever, and then maybe some of the advice that you find yourself giving a lot?
The biggest area of questions I got, really, to be honest, Corey and George, are much more about. Maybe I need to give a little bit of background. The COVID pandemic didn't hit Bulgaria almost at all. So we went through it unscathed, and we have a very, very light lockdown or everything. So it's been almost business as usual here. But the problem we have, being a small and open economy, and specifically with the technology sectors, we're very interconnected with the Western market, specifically European Union, and to a lesser degree North America as well. So, but everything what's happening within the Great Lakes and the States and Europe affects us disproportionately. And the questions people always ask is like, when they were going to open their economies, when you're going to open the economy, what's going on in the States, what's going on in Germany, what's going on in the UK, when the lockdown will finish, because when the investment decisions will kind of start getting to be taken a bit easier, when the projects will get unfreeze rather than being frozen. So I think that's the biggest questions is around those areas. And what I tell them really is, in the meantime, because a lot of people are suffering because of that, not because of their capabilities or anything on their end, it's just because the clients are in a very wait and see mode. And I say that they need to reach out, they need to communicate, they need to restate that we're here for our clients and we'll do whatever we could in order to support them. And if it takes a few months or longer, let it be, we'll do that. One thing, and another thing is to start reorientating their offerings where possible to the sectors which are booming. So we have healthcare, which is absolutely booming. We have financial services, which is starting to change, and they want a different ways to service the customers. We have e-retail, which is absolutely booming as well, because now with all kind of online shopping and deliveries and everything. So I really try to steer the people where is possible to start kind of readjusting the target client segments into industries which are pretty much safeguard within this industry, because the worst hit the people within leisure industry, physical retail, really travel, airlines, which by default we have some, but not so much. But let's say, pharmaceutical, healthcare, e-retail, financial services, and generally the digitalization of everything. Because even airlines, they're looking for digitize as much as possible now. Everyone is looking to digitize. So car manufacturers, they're looking for digitizing. So a lot we need to just move into to seize the opportunity. So I'm really trying to put them different lenses through which they look at the world and opportunities, and see where they can venture out, what they can do more. And at the same time is to harness their existing client relationships and just keep communicating with their clients, and hopefully the things will get better for them. And once they come back, we come back stronger with them, because just being on hold, but then supporting them and kind of start working for the future.
Awesome. And it also sounds like the mindset of the area of your country folk is really poised for this moment, especially with tech and innovation and being problem solvers, right? What last question from me before I let George wrap up with you? What can the startup grind global community do for you, Georgi?
I think another great question, Corey, and I haven't been asked this before, I have to say. I think what we can all do as chapter directors is really start to foster links between our areas and our countries as well, and to see are there any areas of collaboration. So if we can start establishing links or making joint events as well, and I've attended some joint events between Tel Aviv and London, for example, or Silicon Valley and London. That's been very interesting as well. People trying to get their local audience on a global basis. So I think this interconnectedness, if we can actually make it real, and we can make it kind of to connect companies, to connect entrepreneurs, to connect investors. If you have investors in certain area which they're looking for some interesting startups, let's have a conversation. At the same time, if I have startups which are kind of looking to expand in the States one way or the other, let's have a conversation. All this, I think, will be absolutely invaluable.
That's awesome. And we're really excited to be part of that conversation. And then, George, any final questions?
2. 1, if you happen to be on this side of the Atlantic, you have a home in Grand Rapids and in Holland, Michigan. So take advantage of that.
Thank you very much, George.
The second,
I will do.
Please do. The second point is that what Corey and I are beginning to see is that sometimes the tech entrepreneur needs additional skills. And these skills have to do with products, people, processes, and the art of innovating in these 3 areas. We do have a lot of skill. And if you need any help, we're here to support you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great. Thank you very much, guys. And I hope this is just the beginning of a very nice conversation and collaboration.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for the generosity of your time, and look forward to maybe getting together one day when we can do in real life stuff and maybe share a meal together. So there we go.
Absolutely. You're always welcome in Bulgaria as well. I'll be delighted to host you.
Fantastic. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. You too.
All right.
See
ciao.
ya. Bye.